In psychology, there's this concept called compulsion. The thing about a compulsion is the person knows they have it. You know it's not rational. You know it's excessive. But you just can't stop, because that anxiety is coming from a place so deep inside you that your logic just can't beat your emotions. Someone with an OCD about washing their hands. They know their hands are perfectly clean, but they wash them again anyway. You lock the front door, but you still turn your car around to check it one more time. Today, I'm going to look at an entire country through that exact lens. Russia. For over 200 years, Russia has been expanding in the exact same direction. They pause, then they expand again. They retreat, then push out again. Leaders change. Ideologies completely flip. But that direction, it almost never changes. South and West. Why? Is this just a pure raw desire for conquest? Or is it something else? Let's pull up the map. Russia is the largest country on Earth. We're talking 17 million square kilometers. That's about 77 times the size of the Korean Peninsula. Almost double the size of the United States. But this massively huge country has one fatal, glaring flaw. Ports. Look at Russia's northern coast. It borders the Arctic Ocean, which is literally frozen solid for most of the year. The east coast hits the Pacific. And sure, they have ports like Vladivostok, but those ports freeze over in the winter. Plus, to even get out into the open Pacific, the ships have to navigate right past the Japanese archipelago, meaning they essentially need Japan's permission to leave. What about the West? Well, they have access to the Baltic Sea. That's where St. Petersburg is. But to get from the Baltic out to the North Sea, you have to squeeze through the Danish Straits. Once again, you have to pass through someone else's front yard. And the south, you've got the Black Sea. But to get from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, you have to sail right through the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits, which are completely controlled by Turkey. So, sum it all up and you get this. Russia is the largest country in the world, but it doesn't have a single warm water port it can use freely, no matter which way they try to go out. They have to knock on someone else's door. This is Russia's oldest, deepest fear. Let's talk about Peter the Great. Early 1700s. Peter desperately wanted to turn Russia into a European powerhouse. To do that, he needed to trade with Europe. And to trade, he needed an ocean, specifically an ocean that didn't freeze. So what does he do? He goes to war with Sweden for a staggering 21 years. The Great Northern War. At the end of that brutal war, he finally grabs the Baltic coastline. He built St. Petersburg right there. He literally created a window to the sea. But it still wasn't enough. The Baltic Sea is still really tough to navigate in the winter, and you still have that massive choke point, the Danish Straits. It could be blocked at any moment. Russia craved a warmer sea, a freer exit. So their eyes turned south to the Black Sea, into Catherine the Great, Russia's ultimate strategist of the 18th century. She fought two massive wars against the Ottoman Empire, and do you know what the primary goal of those wars was? Grabbing the Black Sea coast, taking the Crimean Peninsula. In 1783, Catherine annexed Crimea, and right there, she built the port of Sevastopol, a port that stays open 365 days a year. The Russian Navy's ultimate dream had finally come true. But wait, to get from the Black Sea out to the Mediterranean, the Bosporus Strait was still in the way. That tiny choke point held by Turkey. Russia wanted to control that, whatever it took. Throughout the entire 19th century, Russia kept aggressively pushing the Ottomans. They tried to push down into the Balkans, all to rip open a path to the Mediterranean, and every single time, Britain blocked them. France stepped in, because if Russia made it down to the Mediterranean, The Western powers knew their own hegemony would be threatened. That's exactly how the Crimean War started in 1853. Russia versus an alliance of Britain, France, and the Ottomans. Russia lost. They backed off. Sure, but they didn't stop. Fast forward to the 20th century, and it's the exact same script. During the Soviet era, Stalin put insane pressure on Turkey. He literally demanded joint control over the Bosporus. When Turkey refused, the US swooped in and brought Turkey into NATO blocked again. Throughout the Cold War, the Soviets pushed down into Afghanistan, looking for another route to a warm sea, a path leading straight to the Indian Ocean. That's why the 1979 invasion happened. They fought a bloody war for 10 years, and they lost. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. 1991, Russia shrank massively. Their Eastern European satellite states broke away. The Baltic states declared independence. Ukraine became independent. Georgia became independent. And the Crimean Peninsula, the home of the Sevastopol port, became part of an independent Ukraine. The beating heart of the Russian Navy was suddenly sitting on foreign soil. Putin first comes to power in 1999. One of the very first things he does, he extends the lease agreement with Ukraine for the Sevastopol port, just to make sure the Russian Black Sea Fleet can keep using it. He knew that if they ever lost Sevastopol, the Russian Navy would be completely paralyzed in the Black Sea. Then, 2014 happens. Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Yanukovych, gets ousted. A pro-Western government takes over. Suddenly, the idea of Ukraine joining NATO isn't just a theory anymore. It starts looking like a very real possibility. Think about it. What if a NATO-aligned Ukraine tears up that lease for Sevastopol? Where does the Russian Black Sea Fleet go? Russia literally felt like they had absolutely no choice, at least from their perspective. A few weeks later, heavily armed soldiers mysteriously appear in Crimea, no insignia on their uniforms. At first, Russia completely denied they were Russian troops, though they admitted it later. Crimea was annexed by Russia, the exact same land that Catherine the Great took in 1783, and that they lost in 1991. They just snatched it right back in 2014. A 231-year geopolitical boomerang. Now let me pause right here and say something really important. Me explaining Russia's expansion does not mean I am justifying it. It's a blatant violation of international law. It is unprovoked aggression. But explaining is not justifying. Understanding why Russia moves the way it does is entirely different from condoning the behavior. Actually, if you want to deal with your adversary properly, you have to understand their logic. Without understanding, there is no strategy. So let's keep going. We need to talk about Russia's other great fear. It's not just the ocean, it's the plains. If you look at Russia's western border, there is almost nothing there. It is a massive, flat expanse stretching all the way from the Baltic to the Black Sea, the northern European plain. There are zero natural barriers here, no mountain ranges, no massive rivers. If an invading army makes up its mind to march on Moscow, it's basically a straight, unimpeded shot, and history proves it. In 1812, Napoleon rode right across this plain straight into Moscow. Moscow bends to the ground. In 1941, Hitler rolled his tanks across this exact same plain. Leningrad was besieged for 900 days. Over 1 million Soviet citizens starved to death during that siege alone. In the collective subconscious of the Russian people, the memories of those two invasions are burned in. The utter, paralyzing terror that the enemy is coming from the west. There is only one way to soothe that terror. You put a buffer zone between your western border and Moscow, and ally, a satellite state, a neutral country. It doesn't matter. They desperately need a cushion. During the Cold War, that is exactly why the Soviet Union turned Eastern Europe into a block of satellite states. Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Romania. For Moscow, these weren't just exports of communist ideology, they were geographical airbags. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, those cushions vanished one by one. They joined NATO, they pivoted to the West. From Russia's point of view, their safety cushions had literally transformed into forward operating bases for NATO. Their fear didn't just return, it multiplied. Alright, here is the absolute core question. If Putin disappears tomorrow, does Russia change? I'll be completely honest with you. Maybe in the short term. Yes, you might get a less aggressive leader, someone more open to diplomatic dialogue. But long term, the map doesn't change. That flat plain on Russia's western border will still be there. Sevastopol will still be stuck in the Black Sea. Turkey will still hold the keys to the Bosporus. And the traumatic ghosts of Napoleon and Hitler will still be deep in the bones of the Russian people. As long as those conditions exist, the next Russian leader is highly likely to operate on the exact same logic. Putin isn't the guy who invented Russia's geopolitical compulsion. He's just the guy expressing it the most violently. The root of the compulsion isn't the man. It's the land. If you really want to wrap your head around this, put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine if Mexico formed a military alliance with China and allowed Chinese military bases right on the Texas border. Do you think the US would just sit there and do nothing? The US would completely lose its mind. They'd be screaming about the Monroe Doctrine, Western Hemisphere security, calling it absolutely unacceptable. And we know this. Look at the 1960 Cuban Missile Crisis. When the Soviets tried to put nukes in Cuba, what did America do? We went right to the brink of global nuclear war. The terror America felt over Cuba, and the terror Russia feels over Ukraine. They are structurally identical. Again, it doesn't make Russia right, but it also means their fear isn't just made up. It is a very real, tangible panic created by geography. One more thing. Energy. Russia is one of the world's largest holders of natural gas. And do you know where the pipelines feeding Europe run through? Ukraine. Before the 2022 war, a huge chunk of Europe literally heated their homes with Russian gas. Germany, Italy, Austria, they were massively dependent on it, and Russia used those pipelines as a straight-up weapon, jacking up prices, choking off the supply, using it to exert massive political leverage. Energy became geopolitics, and the fact that Europe got so hooked on Russian gas, that wasn't just some innocent economic trade. Russia intentionally built a structure to crank up Europe's energy dependence so that Europe could never dare attack them. Those gas pipelines are a form of deterrence, not a military one, an energy deterrence. It is the ultimate Russian security strategy, a brilliant, cynical fusion of geography and natural resources. Let's tie this all together. Is Russia an evil country or a paranoid country? It's not a multiple choice question. It can absolutely be both. You can make evil, horrific choices, and the fuel for those choices can still be genuine. Wrought error. Just like how a person suffering from severe OCD can still do terrible things. The key to understanding Russia's behavior isn't sitting in the Kremlin in Moscow. It's the map. That map with the frozen ocean to the north, the bottlenecked Pacific to the east, and that wide open, defenseless plain to the west. A country that has been dreaming the exact same dream on that map for over 200 years. A country constantly, obsessively moving to reach a warm sea and to block out the terror from the west, whether the guy in charge is a general secretary, or a president. The direction of that movement hasn't really changed. People don't move the land moves the nation. And Russia is the starkest, most brutal example of that reality on Earth. In Part 5, we're shifting to China. We're going to dive into why the second largest economy in the world feels a deep inferiority complex when it looks at the ocean, and we'll dig into the geographical roots of their absolute obsession with breaking out into the Pacific. even if it means building fake islands out of sand.